Good morning and happy Wednesday. Hopefully everybody can see my screen okay. My name is Laura Hamilton. I am an area HR administrator with WSU and I am on the Spokane campus. So today I'm going to be sharing some information on just some basics of improving processes for efficiency in the workplace. Make sure I get this to advance. There we go. So as we think about improving work processes, we have to do more than just go through the motions. We really need to think about, there are a lot of changes happening in academia and in our workplaces. And if we do keep doing things the way we've always done them, we're actually not going to keep getting what we've always gotten. We're going to start getting more of what we don't want. And so we do need to take fresh perspectives and a look at our processes to make sure we're engaging in the most effective way and that we're meeting changing expectations of our different stakeholders, which again would include faculty members that we work with, other team members that we work with, definitely our students. So if we don't make progress and establish some sort of mechanism as a team to look at problem solving and advancing how we do our work, we're going to be dealing with the same problems that we've always dealt with. And we're going to spend a lot of time in that firefighter mode where we're trying to put out different fires and difficulties that exist. And a lot of that within team structures can happen because we're using old processes and because we're not looking at things with a fresh perspective. So one of the most important things is to look at what are our work processes, what are our standards in the way that we engage, and have we defined those appropriately. I had a department that I worked with that they didn't have any standard operating procedures, and the main administrator for the department, as well as one other individual who was key to the processes within the department, both ended up out at the same time. And because they had not taken the time to go through and identify a lot of the processes, they sure were deep in firefighter mode in trying to figure out what were the actions that need to be taken to create specific tasks and to get to the results that are needed as defined by different stakeholders that we have. So processes and process improvement, they are critical to all types of work. Historically, they were much more closely tied to engineering and manufacturing type environments, but standard operating procedures are definitely critical in academics. And so making sure that each department is taking the time to go through and define their own individualized processes is important. When looking at processes for what are the things that we really should focus on as we're looking at process improvement, there are going to be core processes. These are processes that are not temporary. They're not processes that change often. They're things that are the standard way that departments or teams function. Processes that people care about. So if there are processes that seem to get a lot of attention and maybe even a lot of frustration, those might be processes to start with to see if there is some room for improvement or for some changes. Processes that are improvable. Are there processes that we know as members of the team and as users of the process that there would be easier ways to engage, but we haven't been willing to step into that conversation to talk about it. Processes that accomplish a specific outcome, processes within your span of control. So are they processes that your team has the ability to make some changes or to make some recommendations? So they might not be areas that you have the direct decision-making authority to say we're going to change the process, but certainly be as a user of the process, you could speak with the stakeholders to really take a look at if there are alternative ways of engaging in how we accomplish the work that we do. And then challenging but doable processes. Are there things that are a great challenge for everyone? It's not necessarily something that everyone expresses frustrations about, but there are some challenges that might require additional resources. And sometimes those resources are additional individuals and insights and skills that they might bring to the team in looking at the way we would do our work a little bit differently. So a good way from a pretty simple perspective to identify some of these processes and to review your current results and feedback is to use a list and to go through and say, okay, we've identified these processes that are core processes, that are processes that people are experiencing a lot of frustration, and it might even have some bottlenecks that are occurring because of the process. So you've defined what those are. You can list out what are the barriers and the bottlenecks with the processes. What are the supporting facts? So a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about different procedures and processes, especially where some of our processes are really defined outside of our span of control. But what are the supporting facts for the way it's integrating into your team and causing some concerns that we can identify, that we can go back to the decision makers with? And what is the cost? And cost can be in time, in money. It can also be in goodwill. Is there a cost to other departments or other stakeholders because of the way the process is currently being engaged in, that we need to make sure that other people are aware of and are taking into consideration as we are looking at process improvement? At one point in time, I worked with a department where there were a lot of frustrations being expressed about processing time for a particular project that they were working on. And so I was working with their finance director, and we really did go through this process of identifying what are the barriers, where are the bottlenecks, and we're able to gather some fact finding through different individuals who were impacted by this process. And really what we were able to define is there were some great opportunities for process improvement with this particular project. And there was a good deal of cost in labor because of the number of people who were involved in the processing. So the money was definitely a factor, but the bigger factor was the goodwill that it was costing them with not only stakeholders for this particular project, but also it was impacting their ability to work effectively with other departments because of the broad impacts of this particular project. So the process that we went through is we put together a flow chart of the process. Here's step one. What are the tasks that have to be accomplished in step one? Here's step two. What are the tasks that have to be accomplished? As you go through and you put a flow chart of this nature together, for every process, it's going to look very different. For some processes, you may have 3 steps. For some processes, you may have 12 steps. And so the tasks that are under each, there's going to be a different number. So this isn't a predefined, you have to have 4 steps and you have to have 5 tasks for each of these. It's really going to flow based on each individual process that you're assessing. Once you're confident that you have all of those tasks and steps visible, you might go back to that previous chart because you may identify other concerns related to cost. You might find other facts that you hadn't previously captured. And these will be important, especially if it's not a process that you have independent decision-making authority for, and you need to have conversations with other leaders in the department to make some changes. Having this factual information in a way where you can provide it and say, hey, here's some of the areas that we've identified that are impacting the efficiency in how we do our work. So this is the root cause that we got to with this department. So this particular process, I went in and looked it up as I was preparing for this presentation. They had 14 steps. 14 steps for a process that the institution that I was working with had a requirement of 4 steps. So this department had added 10 additional steps to the process. So we identified, okay, processing for this project is taking about 3 times as long as it was taking for other departments who were engaging in similar processes. And so we identified the problem. The problem was we've potentially added some additional steps to this that aren't necessary. So we identified that that was the problem, and we got to this curiosity point of, okay, why? Why were the decisions made to go ahead and add these additional steps? What were we trying to accomplish in adding these additional areas? And as you add an area to say, well, this is an area of the reasoning behind adding an additional step. Okay, why? And continuing to dig into it with a point of curiosity so that you can go through a really pretty extensive process of defining this root cause analysis. And as we went through this process, we added additional stakeholders to really understand from their perspective, if we took away some of those 10 steps that that department had decided to add to the process, what would the impact be to them? Would it be detrimental? Were there different ways to accomplish the same thing? One of the areas they defined pretty clearly was that there were some communication breakdowns within the departments. And because there weren't accountabilities in place for certain members of the team, they added an additional step in the process to hold someone accountable, instead of having really what probably could have been resolved with a conversation and setting of some expectations. And so we were able to get to a lot of the root causes, which were communication issues. And so they were building these overblown processes to address those communication issues. That's not always going to be the concern, but this does give you a structure that works regardless of what the concern is, to really think through and get feedback from different stakeholders on what that why is. Again, this issue tree is going to help you through the process. It might be much broader than just 3 sets of whys. It might be 10 sets of whys that you go through and map because of the different feedback that you need to receive. You may be able to go through 2 sets of whys and be able already to identify where those core concerns and changes might need to happen. So then we get to a brainstorming. So you've identified all of the whys. You've looked at all of the areas of these are reasons that processes have been put together the way they are, and the problem exists, but here are all the whys of why we've implemented in the way we have. Are there changes that can be made without additional approval needed? Are there changes that within your team and your structure you can say, you know what, this is a really easy way to realign, and we can have the conversations to say, we're going to do this realignment, and we've gotten all the feedback to know that that's not going to cause additional issues. If the process does require that additional level of approval, have we put all of the paperwork and reasoning together to demonstrate the efficiencies that can be gained if approval is given to engage in a little bit different way and to redefine the process? Have we thought about changes in process and things that may need to happen to accompany that change? Is there a need for a checklist? As people get used to a new process, sometimes having that checklist that folks can look at and say, okay, we're realigning a little bit here, and we need to make sure we're following all the new processes, hopefully simplified processes. Is it going to be beneficial to remind everyone to have a quick checklist that they can go through to make sure they've met all of those new defined needs? And have we decided on a communication plan for the change? You know, a lot of people get so used to, and we'll talk about this a little bit next Wednesday when I present, but a lot of people get very used to, but this is the way we've always done it. And so helping individuals who are stakeholders to know and understand, why is the process being changed? What are the efficiencies that we expect to experience and understand as a result of the modified process? And also giving people the ability to provide feedback. Sometimes there are processes that we need to do some sort of trial period with to see if the processes are going to work out the way we expect them to. So is there a mechanism as we're going through a trial period with the new process for people to give the input and the feedback on how it's working for them and any impacts that may exist? And if you've participated in other sessions where I have presented, this will look familiar to you. But as we go through those processes and we are making changes, it is important that our teams are held accountable to some of the new processes, to the communications, to any of the decisions that we have made on really what do we need to hold people accountable to as we engage folks in the new process. So my favorite way of doing this is making sure that we're keeping a running task list of who does what by when, and then the follow-up. So we're defining that there are going to be some changes that are made. Who is the responsible party for that change? What exactly is it that we've defined that they're going to do? And what's the deadline that we've provided for them to get that change done by? And then that accountability piece of making sure that they're going back and following up with all of the stakeholders who are impacted by that change. So hopefully this has given you some easy ways to think about meeting as a team, talking about those different processes that you have, focusing first on the core processes, the processes that people are expressing frustrations about, and a way to very easily go through really redefining the processes if we have the ability and the scope to be able to make some of those changes. And next week, we'll talk a little bit more about doing things, getting away from doing things the way we've always done them, just for history's sake. So thanks, you guys, and have a great Wednesday.